Today's mindful moment. Ever think about how the U.S. Constitution, like that bedrock of American freedom, it doesn't mention God?
Not once.
Not once.
Yeah.
It's a pretty,
It's a fascinating detail that often gets overlooked, and it speaks volumes about the surprising origins of American secularism.
yeah, I mean, it's a common misconception that secularism is a recent phenomenon.
Right.
But as we delve into Susan Jacoby's Freethinkers, a history of American secularism,
Yeah.
you'll see it's woven into the very fabric of the United States,
Yeah.
going all the way back to, those fiery debates of the Founding Fathers.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
We tend to think of the Founding Fathers as this unified group, but when it came to religion,
Right.
they were anything but. You had folks like Jefferson championing the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
and then those fervent evangelical Christians gaining traction. What a clash of ideologies.
Imagine those debates, the tension in the room as they hammered out the future of a nation.
Oh, yeah.
Jefferson ever the bold one.
Oh, yeah. Even proposed a complete separation of church and state for his home state of Virginia.
Wow.
It took 7 years
7 years.
of wrangling before it passed,
That is wild.
showing just how radical the idea was at the time.
7 years. That's serious commitment to the cause. It really highlights how intertwined religion and government were back then,
Yeah.
and how revolutionary this idea of separation truly was.
And don't forget, James Madison, the father of the Constitution,
Right.
he penned this powerful document called the Memorial, arguing against any government endorsement of religion.
Oh, wow.
His point: if the government can force you to pay a tax to support one church, what's to stop them from forcing you to conform to any belief?
Ooh.
A chilling thought that resonates even today.
It makes you realize how carefully they were trying to safeguard individual freedom,
Right.
even from the potential tyranny of the majority religion.
The tyranny of the majority.
But here's a twist, even back then.
Yeah.
Practical matters sometimes trumped ideology.
Exactly. The Founding Fathers knew they needed a strong federal union.
Yeah.
And the desire for economic stability ultimately led to the defeat of any attempts to add religious amendments to the Constitution. Pragmatism won the day, proving that even in the 18th century, money talked.
It's fascinating to think how those early economic concerns had such a lasting impact on the very foundation of American secularism.
Yeah.
But let's move on to another surprising connection. Free thought and social justice movements. I always assumed they went hand in hand.
Right.
But Jacoby paints a much more nuanced picture.
It's easy to assume those fighting for social justice were all secular.
Right.
But the story is far more complex. Many early abolitionists and feminists, while deeply religious themselves, were fiercely anti-clerical,
Oh, interesting.
challenging the authority of churches on moral questions.
So they were religious, but also questioning the very institutions they belonged to.
Right.
That's a tricky tightrope to walk.
Exactly. A prime example is Lucretia Mott, a Quaker abolitionist and feminist.
I've heard of her.
She embodied that link between Enlightenment rationalism and liberal religion,
Yeah.
famously saying truth for authority, not authority for truth. Talk about challenging the status quo.
And she wasn't just talking the talk. She was a key player at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, which was a turning point for the women's rights movement. Their declaration, modeled after the Declaration of Independence, was incredibly bold for its time.
It's fascinating how the Seneca Falls Convention borrowed the language of the Founding Fathers to demand equal rights for women.
Yeah.
But here's a shocking truth.
Okay.
The First World Anti-Slavery Convention is actually remembered today not for its stance on slavery,
Why?
but for its refusal to allow women delegates.
Wow, that's a serious contradiction. It seems even progressive movements weren't immune to the biases of the time.
Exactly. It highlights the fact that these movements were often grappling with conflicting ideas about authority, both religious and secular. It wasn't a simple unified front, and that tension makes this period of history all the more intriguing. Yeah. It's remarkable how intertwined these social justice movements were with the larger currents of American secularism. But as we move into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we see a fascinating new chapter unfold, what some call the golden age of free thought.
This is where figures like Robert Ingersoll, the so-called great agnostic, burst onto the scene, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He was like a rock star of reason, drawing huge crowds to his lectures.
Ingersoll was a captivating orator known for his wit and his fiery critiques of organized religion.
Right.
His lectures weren't just dry intellectual exercises.
Right.
They were events,
Yeah.
full of passion and humor,
Really?
challenging conventional wisdom and offering a new vision for society.
Jacoby describes these events as truly electrifying. Imagine a time when church attendance was the norm.
Yeah.
People were flocking to hear a guy rail against religious dogma. It speaks volumes about the growing appeal of free thought.
And then came Darwin. His theory of evolution, with its compelling scientific explanation for the development of life, really shook things up. Suddenly, there was this alternative narrative to the biblical creation story, and it ignited a firestorm of debate.
It's hard to overstate the impact of Darwin. His ideas didn't just challenge religious beliefs.
Right.
They transformed how people understood their place in the world.
Absolutely. And this wasn't just some abstract intellectual debate happening in ivory towers.
Right.
It was filtering down into everyday life, influencing how people thought about science, religion, and their own personal beliefs.
Speaking of everyday life, the rise of secular education through public high schools had a huge ripple effect. For the first time, you had large numbers of young people being exposed to scientific ideas outside a religious framework.
That shift in education was monumental. It contributed to a growing acceptance of scientific thinking and challenged the authority of traditional religious explanations. It's no coincidence that this period also saw the rise of groups like the American Secular Union, dedicated to promoting the separation of church and state.
It sounds like free thought was having a real moment. But as with any social movement, there was bound to be pushback. Enter the social Darwinists,
Right.
figures like Herbert Spencer,
Yeah.
who took Darwin's ideas in a very different direction.
Spencer is a fascinating, albeit controversial figure. He took Darwin's concept of survival of the fittest and applied it to society, arguing that it justified social and economic inequality. His ideas, while ultimately flawed, had a significant influence on the political landscape of the time.
It's a reminder that even scientific ideas can be twisted to serve certain agendas. It makes you wonder how much of what we believe is shaped by the social and political context of our times.
That's a great question, and it's one that continues to resonate today. As we delve further into the 20th century, we see this tension between science, religion, and ideology play out in even more dramatic ways.
This is where things get really interesting. Jacoby describes how efforts to suppress free thought intensified in the early 20th century, fueled by events like World War I and the Red Scare.
The war created a climate of fear and paranoia, and the government cracked down on dissent, targeting pacifists, socialists, and anyone deemed a threat to national security. It was a dark chapter for civil liberties.
Jacoby recounts how even a short film about the American Revolution faced censorship during the Red Scare. It's ironic that a nation founded on the ideals of freedom and rebellion would turn against those very principles in the name of security.
It highlights the fragility of freedom, even in a democracy. But amid this wave of intolerance, there were those who fought back. The ACLU, founded in the 1920s, emerged as a champion for free speech, defending the rights of everyone, even the most unpopular groups.
The ACLU was willing to stand up for the rights of communists and anarchists,
Right.
even when it was deeply unpopular.
Right.
It speaks to their unwavering commitment to the idea that even the most offensive ideas deserve protection under the First Amendment.
Their work was groundbreaking, setting precedents that continue to shape our understanding of free speech today. But as the 20th century progressed, the landscape of American secularism faced a new challenge, the resurgence of religious fundamentalism.
This is where those culture wars we hear so much about really start to heat up, right?
Exact.
The battle over school prayer, the rise of televangelism. These issues became lightning rods for a growing divide in American society.
You hit the nail on the head. Conservative Christians, feeling marginalized by what they saw as a secularization of American culture, began to mobilize politically. They pushed back against the Supreme Court's decisions on school prayer, seeing it as an assault on their values and a threat to the very soul of the nation.
It wasn't just about legal battles, though, right?
Right.
The rise of televangelism brought these debates into our living rooms, with figures like Billy Graham and Fulton Sheen captivating millions with their televised sermons.
Televangelism was a game changer. It gave conservative Christianity a powerful platform, reaching a vast audience and spreading their message with a new level of sophistication. It's a fascinating example of how technology can amplify these cultural battles and how the media landscape itself becomes part of the story.
It seems like at this point the stage was set for a major clash between secularism and religion. Did anyone see this coming?
Perhaps not the specific events, but the underlying tensions were certainly brewing. And as we move into the latter half of the 20th century and into the 21st, these tensions would erupt in ways that continue to shape the American landscape.
It's mind-boggling to think that even in the 21st century,
Mm,
with all our scientific advancements and supposed enlightenment,
right.
that we're still wrestling with these fundamental questions about the role of religion in society.
Yeah, it speaks to the enduring power of belief systems and how they shape our worldviews, even as science and technology advance.
Mm,
It's a reminder that progress isn't linear. It's a
right.
constant push and pull between different ideas and values.
Jacoby paints a pretty sobering picture of the challenges facing secularism today.
Yeah.
But she also hints at some potential bright spots, right? But what
Yes.
about the rise of the unchurched? Could that be a sign of a more secular future?
It's certainly a trend worth watching. The unchurched are the fastest growing religious group in America,
Wow.
which suggests a growing segment of the population is finding meaning and purpose outside of traditional religious institutions.
But does that automatically translate to a more secular outlook?
Right,
I mean, some people might be spiritual but not religious, right?
absolutely. It's important to distinguish between secularism as a philosophical worldview and simply not belonging to a church. The unchurched are a diverse group, and their reasons for not affiliating with organized religion vary widely.
So while the rise of the unchurched might not be a clear-cut victory for secularism,
Right.
it does suggest a shifting landscape, a
Yeah.
growing openness to alternative ways of thinking about spirituality and meaning-making.
It's a reminder that the battle between secularism and religion isn't this monolithic clash between two opposing forces. It's a complex and nuanced conversation happening within individuals' communities and across society as a whole.
So what does this all mean for us today? How do we navigate this complex landscape where personal beliefs intersect with public life and where the lines between church and state are constantly being tested?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It requires us to be informed, to engage in thoughtful dialogue, and to be vigilant in defending the principles of a truly inclusive and democratic society. We need to remember the lessons of history, both the triumphs and the setbacks, as we navigate these ongoing debates.
One of the biggest takeaways from Jacoby's book is that the fight for secularism isn't about erasing religion from public life.
Right.
It's about ensuring everyone has the freedom to believe or not believe without fear of coercion or discrimination.
Precisely. It's about upholding the separation of church and state as a cornerstone of a free and just society. And it's about recognizing that the public square is enriched by a diversity of viewpoints, including those informed by secular values.
It's a call to action, reminding us that we can't afford to be complacent or take our freedoms for granted. As we've seen, the struggle for a truly secular society is an ongoing one, and it requires our active participation.
Absolutely. It means being informed, being engaged, and being willing to challenge those who seek to impose their religious beliefs on others. The future of American secularism depends on it.
Well, that was a whirlwind tour through centuries of American history. It's amazing how relevant these debates still are today. If you're as intrigued by this topic as we are, we highly recommend diving into Susan Jacoby's Freethinkers. It's a thought-provoking and timely read that will challenge your assumptions and give you a deeper understanding of this crucial aspect of American history.
And for more deep dives into fascinating topics, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive and share this episode with a friend who loves a good intellectual challenge.
We also have a link on our website where you can purchase Jacoby's book directly. Every purchase helps support the show and keeps those thought-provoking conversations flowing. Until next time, keep those minds engaged.